Most folks probably already know this by now, but adult stores aren't much like what people used to imagine. I mean, back in the day, sure. They probably started out like fat guys in long coats sneaking out of alleyways with smuggled magazines hidden inside brown paper bags, acting like they were committing some sort of crime. Today, though, they're actually pretty tidy, classy-looking places packed with a wide variety of customers. No more behind-the-curtain peep shows, no sticky pink carpets under your feet, and definitely no faint sounds of moaning echoing from the back room. Instead, these shops are clean, tasteful, and cater to all kinds of folks. The grainy old videos on flickering TVs hidden in corner stores are long gone. There used to be stores like that, though, and I worked in one I'll just call Lavender Bliskend of a nod to the rival business my bosses hated. It wasn't some seedy single-floor dump on the outskirts of town or anything like that. Even though we sold adult toys and dolls, we still considered ourselves one of the classier spots in that rundown shopping center. Honestly, I don't like bad-mouthing my former coworkers, but man, some of the characters I got to know there, it's a wild bunch. There was a tattoo artist I'm convinced could ruin a stick figure, and a piercing shop that basically guaranteed you a trip to the ER with every ear piercing. Then there was a liquor store, and rumor had it, their alcohol was barely intoxicating at all. We also had this high-end boutique run by an older, super conservative couple who were as fire and brimstone as you could get. Yet every Friday night they'd come in and buy the most specific adult films we had. They joked that they were doing their part in getting the smut off the streets, the husband telling me each time, while his wife clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Now, if it really was about cleaning up the streets, then I gotta ask, did they only buy movies from this one particular production company that made films with a very specific theme, featuring one particular hole, in a very particular racial context, and all their movies were part of a serialized story? Maybe they were just into the articles. Hell, I've heard about the articles so often I've lost count. Honestly, I didn't care what they watched. I was just trying to earn my paycheck. If they didn't come in looking for hardcore mags, my bosses wouldn't pay me, and I'd probably need student loans just to finish college. That's exactly why I worked there. I'd gone to college for a year, but the crushing anxiety over debt made me hit pause, so I worked for a few years to save enough money to go back. Being a manager at this adult shop wasn't my only option, but it was definitely the best-paying gig I had at the time. You'd think someone would be eager to fill such a position, right? But when I first took the job, my bosses told me I was only the second person to apply. When I asked about the first, all they said was that some people were such big freaks, they'd scare away the hardcore fantasy crowd. I didn't press it, I just jumped on the opportunity. After a few years, I genuinely started thinking about quitting altogether, maybe going back to college. Things looked promising in the adult retail industry, especially in 2002. My boss told me that the prospects looked pretty good for brick-and-mortar adult stores at the time. Still, I'm glad I went back to school the next year, because the event I'm about to tell you about played a big part in convincing me to leave that industry for good. It was just an ordinary fall Friday at the mall, about a couple of hours before close, and we kept the store open later than most because of the nature of our business. The other stores in that mall, like the clothing shops and the electronics stores, had already shut their doors for the night. The fashion boutique guy and his wife had already been in and gone with their latest VHS haul. The day was winding down nicely. Usually, our customers tiptoe and quietly kind of sneaking around, but that night, it was a different story. The front door suddenly flung open with such force that it broke the little bell hanging above it, shattering it forever. Honestly, that was the least of my worries. The man stalked through the store like he owned the Placitol, really tall, at least 6 feet, but he wasn't bulky or muscular. More gangly, kind of awkward looking, not intimidating at all, really. Had he just burst in like that and stormed up to the counter, I wouldn't have thought much of it. But no, he got right up in my face, slammed a brown paper bag down on the counter, and jabbed a finger toward me. "This product's defective, and I want to return it for a refund," he snapped. I rolled my eyes and pointed to the giant no return sign hanging over my shoulder. "You can't return that," I told him. I knew better than to stick my hand into any brown paper bag from Angel's Delight. My bosses told me stories about how some thick bros would try to return their used adult toys as a prank. And honestly, I never knew if those stories were true. But I wasn't about to risk grabbing someone else's used, possibly contaminated merchandise. What's the item?" I asked, trying to keep things professional. "Can you take it out of the bag?" The guy sighed heavily, theatrically even, and then pulled the item out of the bag. At first glance, I didn't recognize it, but then he flipped the box over. That's when I saw it was some kind of inflatable mask latex rubber, kind of like a mask, but stretchiest latex with a hose connected to a pump, so it could be inflated while worn. I had no idea when he bought this thing. We'd had a copy of it on the wall for months, and I remembered it was gone for over a week, sold by someone working a shift while I was off. So I figured that's when it disappeared. "So what's wrong with it?" I asked as he fumbled with the box. He didn't seem embarrassed, more like he was angry. He pulled the rubber mask out, the hose flapping on the counter, and held it up. "It's torn. Look." Sure enough, there was a rip at the neck, like the material had just decomposed. And maybe it had. Rubber and latex do expire after all. This mask might have been sitting there since the 80s, just aging on the wall. It probably wasn't even his fault, but he sure wanted a refund, which was impossible, no returns, period. The only way I could issue a refund would be if I did it with my own money. No return policy meant no refunds, even if it was defective. That's why I told him, "You should have been more careful." Yeah, I was being a jerk, but I didn't like being in his face. Then suddenly, before I even had a chance to react, this tall guy grabbed me by the back of the head and slammed my cheek into the desk. I felt the pressure of that inflatable mask digging into my temple. He leaned in close and didn't whisper. I'd have to paraphrase here because my memory's fuzzy. But I'm pretty sure he told me something like, "Listen here, you smut-selling, smug little punk. I know it says no returns, but you sold me a defective product. Would you expect me to pay for your mistake?" He pushed down even harder, and I honestly thought my skull was going to crack. The guy was way stronger than he looked. I remember blabbering with my face mashed into the desk, "No, sir. I want a refund." I managed to get out as he held me there. And then I felt cold metal pressed against my head, probably a gun, I guess. But no, it was just the metallic feel of some object he pressed into my temple before removing it. I couldn't see a gun, but the way he held himself, combined with the coat he was wearing, typical October weather. I can't say for sure he had one. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. The only thing I can say for sure is that he got his money back. Hell, I handed him an extra $10, shaking so badly I was overcounting. His whole demeanor changed then. He smiled, thanked me, and left, taking that mask and bag with him. I couldn't prove it happened, and honestly, I didn't even want to call the cops, definitely not in that mall, not when I was working that shift. It wasn't the kind of place where they'd bother. I told my bosses about it, though, thinking they'd doubt me. But when I described that guy, they already knew exactly who I was talking about. One boss just said, "Yeah, sometimes it gets like that," and the other added, "Next time, just process the return." That night, I decided I'd saved up enough to go back to college. I gave my notice the next day, worked out my last 60 days, and then left that industrial, sketchy adult shop behind for good. Never went back. I'm Paul, by the way, used to be a mall security guard. You'd think that job would be unbearable, but I did my stint in a small-town mall back in the 90s, way before Hollywood made that kind of security work seem exciting. Now I work in private security, but back then, I was directly employed by the mall itself. Not a huge place, maybe 20 stores with a food court and a fountain where kids threw coins and made wishes. At the back, there was a giant warehouse complex. Most stores leased part of this space for stocking inventory, and some rented it out to other businesses as well. Basically, a maze of storage units. Only about 40% of the mall was visible to shoppers. The rest was hidden behind walls and corridors. Shoppers walking past Radio Shack, Borders, or Gadzooks didn't see what I saw behind the scenes. The mall's layout was chaotic and of a pain to navigate. Sometimes you'd have to go down one escalator and up another just to get from one section to another. If anyone out there from the 90s is listening, you probably know what I mean: cramped, rundown, and feeling like it was losing its shine already. Add in the warehouse maze, and it's no wonder we needed security 24/7. Plenty of hidden corners where all kinds of trouble could hide out. At first, I mostly dealt with petty theft, a perv looking at a girl, a missing kid found safe, or some kids dared to sleep overnight in the warehouse. Management went ballistic over that, trying to crack down hard, but in the end, they did nothing. The weirdest stuff started happening about 2 years in. My buddy Chris and I were working when our senior guard, Ben, was in the control room watching the cameras. It was a slow, midweek afternoon, mall pretty average, when I got a radio alert. "Bryn," the voice crackled. "We've got a code whatever and an unattended package in your sector. That's something you can't ignore." Still pretty tense after the Oklahoma City bombing. We'd found abandoned bags before, but never anything serious enough to call in the bomb squad. Usually, they were just shoppers leaving their stuff behind. But this time, there was a filthy duffel tucked under a bench near the central fountain. Nobody was looking at it when I got there. Bryn told me to grab it, and I'll admit I was reckless. The bag looked greasy, dusty, and even reeked of piss. My first thought was, who pees on a bomb? I grabbed it blindly, knowing it was probably a really dumb idea. The bag was open, and inside I saw clothes. Nothing alarming, just some old, worn-out stuff, probably abandoned after someone bought new clothes that day. But there was also a plush toy, an old, loved stuffed cat, tucked right in there. I shoved it back, grossed out by the smell, and didn't think too much about it. I took it out back to the dumpsters and washed my hands thoroughly. A week or two later, I got the same alert again. Another duffel bag, same spot. This time it was newer, cleaner, and more out in the open. Still, I didn't want to touch it, so I peeked inside from a little distance. It was just more clothes, some food wrappers, mostly junk, like Twinkies and beef jerky. Maybe the same guy had left the same set of clothes twice, or maybe just a weird coincidence. Anyway, I bagged it and tossed it out, told Bryn, and moved on. The pattern continued. A few days later, one of the store clerks found a duffel bag in the women's dressing room. She looked pale when I suggested it might be an explosive device. The smell in this one was even worse, musty and rotten. No piss this time, but still vile. She almost puked, so I took it myself and dumped it outside again. By now, 3 identical bags, 3 sets of clothes or similar, that kept turning up. Chris, my buddy, joked about someone living in the mall. I thought about it, and for a while I started piecing things together, suspecting maybe someone was hiding out, sleeping in the warehouse or ventilation shafts. Over the following weeks, I kept noticing strange things during my night shifts. Shadows, figures in black carrying that same duffel bag, always just out of full view, faces hidden, always avoiding my gaze. I probably sounded nuts even to myself, but I swear, I saw those shadowy figures slipping into the dark corners of the warehouse. I got paranoid, I'll admit it. One night, I nearly sprinted down the B route in eagerness to catch someone, but when I got there, I slowed down and tried to act like I didn't care. The warehouse was dimly lit but not pitch black. I was whistling, trying to look casual. Then I started noticing small details. This shelving unit belonged to the shut-down clearance store. Those boxes looked suspicious, and I even thought I saw a makeshift little hideout made from opened boxes taped together. A tiny little shelter that no one else had seen. Maybe he wanted me to find it, I don't know. I thought about pulling out my baton and exposing myself to whatever was lurking there. My old security training kicked in. I went to flick it open only to get it stuck. I fumbled around and had to force it out by hand, which was embarrassing. I called out, "Hey, is anyone in there?" No response, of course. I pushed the door flap aside, and I was hit with a wave of something chemical level smell, one of the nastiest things I've ever encountered. It was the smell of human existencino bodily fluids, just pure, unfiltered filth. It explained why someone would keep disposing of those bags. Inside, I found a bunch of Stuffmore bags, some sleeping bags and the same black clothes I'd seen before, all worn out and filthy. No boots, surprisingly, even though I remembered heavy footsteps charging at me during my chase. It was obvious he wore those boots all the time, maybe a signature of sorts. I backed out and tried to figure out his store's identity. Turns out, it was the old budget clothing store that shut down last year. Someone abandoned a bunch of dodgy cheap clothing in there, maybe because they went bankrupt or for some other reason. These weren't exactly high-end brands, just basic stuff, probably from some cheap warehouse clearance. Who knew what kind of shady operation was behind it all? I wasn't a retail worker, but I knew enough to connect it all. I cautiously peered into the den of this hidden squatter, and honestly, there wasn't much to see, just more trash and old clothes. I knew I'd have to call the police to investigate, but that wasn't really my job. I was just supposed to stop trouble, not get involved in solving mysteries. Still, I was relieved to finally accept that it was out of my hands. I backed away from the hideout and realized two things. The den was empty, meaning he was gone, but that meant he could be anywhere. I fumbled for my radio, dropped it in panic, and then, of course, asked my backup, who was a friendly, motherly figure of the security team, to check in. She was on the radio quick, asking what was going on, and I tried to tell her. But just then, all the lights in the warehouse went out, total blackout. Not a glitch, not a power failure, but deliberate. My heart pounded. There was no generator problem. Someone had to have flipped the switch. For a moment, I thought maybe the guy responsible was still inside, hiding. I pulled out my flashlight just as I heard heavy footsteps pounding toward Mefest. A gaunt figure in black burst through the darkness, hitting me dead center. I fell backward, smacking into a shelf, barely getting a glimpse of him. I heard him mumble something, saw him stumble, a blur in my flashlight hand, then he took off down the aisle. I was stunned, trying to process what just happened. Honestly, I wasn't paid enough for this crap. My pride was wounded, my shoulder was aching, and I was frozen for a moment. Then I scrambled, got up, and started chasing after him, radioing Mom, trying to get details out between gasps and frustration. He darted through the dark corridors, and I could barely keep up with my flashlight. When I finally told her to call the cops, I dropped the radio and ran faster. I lost him for a beat, but then I heard a door slam down the hall. I knew where he was heading. There was a small cluster of rooms: break room, restroom, some maintenance closets between warehouses A and B. I bolted toward it, worried he might be waiting with a weapon. I burst inside and the lights were still on. No squatter with a firearm, just an open bathroom with two stalls. One had its door pulled off and tossed aside. I went inside, shining my flashlight into the vent part of the ceiling, pulled loose. I had a fleeting thought I could hear someone crawling away through the vent, but maybe I imagined it. Then I noticed writing in the mirror, big in Sharpie. I can't be sure if it was from him, but I remember clearly Somion had scrawled the F word and eat poop. Yep, just like that, big letters, plain as day. Honestly, I don't know if he'd just written it, or if some other guy had left graffiti. The bathroom was part of the warehouse, separately used by staff and vendors, not the public. I also suspect, women's restrooms tend to be less vandalized, so maybe it was some bored handyman or squatter's doing. Anyway, I wasn't about to get into a vent chasing some random vandal, no way. I waited for the cops, who arrived shortly after. They checked out the scene and confirmed there was indeed a squatter living in the mal, probably more than one. We found at least 4 other hidden spots scattered around inside storage rooms, behind panels, in the vents. Only one was in the warehouse. The rest were in the maze of corridors and hidden spaces. We never found any weapons, backpacks, or personal ID, nothing indicating who this guy was, just lots of black clothes, trash, and food wrappers. No manifesto or plans, nothing sinister. But I'll never forget the stuff in that first duffel, the dirty plush cat, probably his favorite toy. Did I throw it away? I suppose that was what made him tell me to eat crap, and that line became a goofy joke among the security team afterward. But really, it was creepy that someone had been living there, hiding in the walls for who knows how long. It explains why management was so determined to keep it quiet. All those crawl spaces, vents, and secret hiding spots gave cover to whoever was in there. I never found proof of anything terrible, no crimes committed, no harm done, but I knew enough to stay cautious. Maybe if I'd looked harder I might have found more clues, but in the end, we just decided it was better not knowing, as long as he never returned. I left the job about a year and a half later, and I can still remember those shadows lurking in the walls. I don't have any concrete answers about who he was. That's frustrating. But I do remember, about 10 years after I quit, my wife and I living far away, talking about our hometown. Her mom still sent us the local paper, and one story caught my eye about a man arrested nearby, charged with stalking, harassment, and conspiracy to kidnap. Turns out, he'd been living rough, stalking women, and they found a manifesto in his apartment, just pages of scribbles about one particular woman. I can't find that story online anymore, and I don't know what happened afterward. Maybe he died, maybe the charges were dropped. He looked sickly in his mugshot, and I only saw him once, rushing at me with a frantic look, so I'm pretty sure that was him, living in those hidden places of the mall. It's a chilling thought, the idea that you never really know what lurks behind the walls, who's hiding in your world, waiting. It's more unsettling than any ghost story or horror movie because it's real, and it could happen anywhere, anytime. And that's why I don't think I'll ever feel truly safe, even after all these years.